So, driving the Citroën C3, there's a couple of things you notice. First of all, the car itself is very comfortable. The suspension is quite soft, which you notice going over bumps. It deals with them quite well. Problem is, like for example now, going over a speed bump, you tend to bobble quite a little bit. It doesn't settle into itself immediately. Then the steering. The steering itself is quite light. It's not super pinpoint though, so you get decent enough feedback from the wheels, but you do kind of find yourself searching sometimes for where the front end is. But overall, the steering itself, nothing really to complain about. Now, the car, like I say, is very comfortable. The seats themselves, you kind of feel like you're sitting in a big couch almost. The one thing this car does well is it makes you feel like you're driving something big, so you don't feel like you're sitting in a car that's as small as it is, unless you pull up next to something that is bigger than what you're driving in. In terms of the usability while you're driving the car, I mean, everything is where it needs to be. The only annoying bit is that there's not so many buttons in the car, so you have like your very basic stuff like your volume controls in the car. But in terms of like your climate control, it's all done through this touch screen, and it's not the most intuitive touchscreen. It's not a screen that, you know, is super responsive. There's no haptic feedback, so you kind of do find yourself searching, especially when you're driving. So if you're looking to put on the climate control, for example, you wind up taking yourself out of your Android Auto to a completely separate screen. So if you're following your navigation, you find yourself having to look down, take your eyes off the road, because the screen isn't that high up either. You have all your other controls, your phone controls, your radio controls, everything is pretty much done through the screen. There are some buttons on the steering wheel. You can cycle through different information, you can choose different radio stations, you have your volume control, your voice buttons. Then you can change your information here, like how much range you have left, your speed limit, your trip, all of the useful information, your fuel consumption. That's another thing about this car. It's not the most thirsty car in the world if you drive it conservatively. So because it's not the most powerful engine in the world, you do find yourself having to wring its neck a little bit if you want to get up to a decent amount of speed. So because it's only a 1.2 and a 3-cylinder, it's not the most punchy engine in the world. It's got enough power for city driving, you know, for your short trips going to the shops and back, but it's definitely not a racing car. But that's not exactly why you buy a car like this. You buy a car like this because it's comfortable. It's not it's not like you're driving a bus. You buy this car because you need something to run around in. It would be a great first car for somebody, especially at its price point with what you get in it. You get a crazy amount of specs for what you pay. This car's starting price was 255,000 Rand, and you have all the things you could look for. You have Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, you have cruise control, speed limiter, your infotainment system, which, as I say, is not the greatest infotainment system on the market, but you wouldn't expect it to be at this price point. Things that the car doesn't come with as standard is your auto dimming lights. It doesn't have automatic windscreen wipers, but it has plenty of features. It has lane departure warning, it has tire pressure monitoring, it has a speed recognition system in it. So if you want to set your cruise control, if you're on a road trip, all you do, push a button, it'll recognize what the speed limit was on the last speed limit sign that it's passed, and it'll set it to that immediately. Back to the engine, it's decent enough lower down. It's not the quickest accelerating car. Its 0 to 100 is roughly 11.5 seconds, around about there. So like I say, it's not a race car, it's not a drag car, but it gets up to highway speeds plenty easy enough. It also stays at highway speeds plenty easy enough. And again, with the cruise control, it's not adaptive cruise control, but it keeps you at those highway speeds without struggling too much. You know, it's decent enough for overtaking. It doesn't have the best pickup, so if you slam your foot down, the throttle response isn't immediate, but it has enough power to get you through day-to-day driving. Then the main issue with having a small 1.2 3-cylinder engine is if you put the aircon on, or the climate control, it siphons power from the engine like that. You actively feel the car slump. So you put the climate control on and you feel it suck power away from the car, and you feel like you have to drive the car to hell and back just to get up to a decent speed with any level of quickness. So if you do want to drive around with your aircon on continuously, be prepared to make a lot of stops to your nearest petrol station, because you have to get the car pretty close to the red line, which is at 5,500 revs, so not crazy, for you to feel that power kick in again. There's a lot of what I kind of call empty acceleration on the lower end when you have the air conditioning on. So you'll have your foot down and the car is moving forward, but it's not with any sort of pull. You don't feel yourself getting pulled into the back of the seat. You don't feel anything on your body per se. You almost feel like you're leaning forward to try and get the car to go. So yeah, it's like I say, for small short trips, it's got plenty of kick, but the place where I feel this car really shines is on the highway, because again, with that soft suspension, you feel like this car is made for cruising. You would never say so, judging by how it looks, but when you're on the highway, you feel like you can just relax. You feel the car settle into its own. You don't feel like it's trying to keep up with everybody else. You feel like you can comfortably sit at highway speeds and not stress about, am I going to have enough to overtake this person or hit that gap? You can comfortably cruise at 120 kilometers an hour with the fuel consumption sitting at 3.5 liters per 100 Ks, and it's very comfortable. You get some cars such as the Fiat 500 where, you know, I've driven one of the older ones and it felt like it was a city car made for city driving, and that's where it's stuck. So when you got onto the highway with that car, you felt like you were constantly trying to keep up with everybody else. With this, like I say, you can comfortably sit at highway speeds and not worry about if I'm holding anybody up, if I'm going too slow for everybody around me. In terms of visibility, the car itself, the visibility itself is great. You have a great view out the front. If you adjust your seating position, it's got a great driving position. You have plenty of adjustment, a lot of adjustment in the steering wheel. You have a good grasp of the dimensions of the car when you're driving it. The only real issue in terms of visibility is here on the A-pillars. Because of the angle that they sit at, and they are quite thick, they do create quite a bit of a blind spot here in the front. So if you are looking to pull out from a driveway or whatnot, you kind of do need to take a second check, just because it does create quite a blind spot. But other than that, there's not really that many blind spots around the car. With my seating position in the car being quite low and relatively far back, I do sit right next to the B pillar. So, you know, if you do your blind spot checks, you do have to look quite far around. You don't just glance to the side. But other than that, it's really nothing to complain about. In terms of the transmission, you have a 5-speed manual. You do have a 6-speed auto option. However, it's not going to be the cheapest option to upgrade. So the 5-speed manual, it's good enough. It's not the best transmission I've ever driven with. You don't find yourself looking for gears though, and there is an indicator here telling you to change up. However, it doesn't tell you to change down. But you'll find most of your power coming from second gear and third. You feel it die a little bit in terms of fourth and fifth, but that you learn to kind of get around. Yeah, but otherwise you don't, it's not like you have a super shaky gear lever that you don't know where it is. It's pretty mechanical in terms of how it feels. You can feel it clicking into gear. Yeah, it's decent enough. It's not the most meaty transmission you'll feel. It doesn't feel like it's made out of cast iron like you would in some old Fords, but it's plenty robust enough. So overall impressions of driving the Citroën C3, it's a great car for city driving. Would I recommend it if you want to carry around loads of people? Not necessarily. Do I think that there are better options in the bracket? Yes, I do. There are certain cars that have more features, that are more well-spec'd and feel a bit more punchy and more sporty to drive. But once again, that's not necessarily why you buy this car. You don't buy it for its sports appeal. You don't buy it because you want it to be the boy racer, you know, pulling away from every stop sign and every traffic light as fast as you can. It's a great cruiser, it's a great little run around, and yeah, for what you pay for this car at $255,000, the amount of specs you get on it, the amount of space you get, especially in the front, it's hard to argue with the value for money for this vehicle.